Alright guys, so this is your review video for your first unit test, which is tomorrow if you're watching this the night before. I want to remind you that if you do that study guide that you can find in Teams, remember we're going to Unit 1 channel, Files, then Documents, and your study guide is there. Many of you have already put this into Notability. That is a great study tool to get you ready for the test tomorrow, and if you complete the entire thing, you get 5 points extra credit. Remember, you have to finish the whole thing to get any extra credit points, not partial, nothing like that. It's all done, all points. That's due the day of your test. All right, let's get to a couple of topics for your test tomorrow. First, the bicameral legislature. Remember, this means that in Congress we have two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And we want to remember that this comes from the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise combined the Virginia Plan, which was the large state plan, where people in the large states wanted Congress only based on representation, versus the small state plan or the New Jersey plan, where the small states had asked for equal representation throughout Congress. We took those two plans, we combined them to get the Great Compromise, which gave us the bicameral legislature. Great Compromise, bicameral legislature. Direct election. Now, when we talk direct election, we are saying each person, their vote, directly elects senators and representatives. We elect the president through the Electoral College, which is not a direct vote. So when we are talking direct election, who are we directly electing? That's members of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay. The Electoral College. This is how we elect the president. Remember, the founding fathers created the Electoral College because they did not trust the average voter in the origination of the country, because education was not widespread. It was not like it is now. The access to information, to news, was not as easy. In the Electoral College, we see people, the popular vote, being cast. That popular vote in each state is tallied. Whatever popular vote wins in each state, they get all of the electors. So if we're in a state like Texas and a candidate wins the popular vote, they get all 38 of the electors. Remember, we need 270 votes to win in the Electoral College, and this process can only be changed through an amendment. So it's possible to get rid of the Electoral College, but we need an amendment to do that. Remember, the Electoral College number that each state has comes from the number of senators plus the number of representatives for each state. So in Texas, we see there are 36 representatives, and every state has 2 senators. We add those together and we get 38 for the Electoral College. The amendment process. The amendment process was added to the Constitution to allow for change over time. Remember, at the beginning of the country, that world, those people, their thoughts were completely different than the world we live in today. So there had to be something added to the Constitution to allow for change over time, and that is the amendment process. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution dealt with the people's rights. Remember, you call that the Bill of Rights. But the majority of amendments that have been passed in the Constitution deal with civil rights, the people's rights, and tailoring what our government should look like. So political power. There's many amendments that have been added to the Constitution that talk about clarifying the powers of the government, whether that be the legislative, whether that be the executive branch. So when we look at the amendments, all 27 of them, they deal mostly with political power and civil rights of the people. What you see on the screen here is how we amend the Constitution and the different methods that we can use. Federalist versus anti-federalist. If we look at the root of this word, we see federal. When we see federal, we're thinking about the big government, the government that runs all 50 states. That is our federal government. That federal government was designed and follows the Constitution. When the Constitution was written, remember, it didn't just happen, it didn't just go into place. The people had to vote to either pass and keep it, to ratify it, or not. And when that process was happening, we saw two groups in the country. The Federalists, who supported the federal government, they supported the Constitution. And we had the anti-federalists, who did not support passing the Constitution as it was written. And as you can see in the political cartoon, on the one side we have the anti-federalist saying a Bill of Rights protects the people no matter what class or situation, and that represents the argument of the anti-federalists. They did not hate the form of government that the Constitution had created, they just wanted the people's rights protected. And the Anti-Federalists demanded a Bill of Rights be added to the Constitution for that to be possible. So you can see on the other side, the Federalist is saying, you don't need it because you already have all of these rights, but okay, if it makes you happy and you vote with us, we'll add it. So the Federalists added the Bill of Rights right after the ratification or passing approval of the Constitution, and they held up their bargain to the Anti-Federalists. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court power, their biggest power is judicial review. And remember, judicial review is the review of laws or acts performed by people in the government based on the Constitution. So you can see here that the Supreme Court is saying it's either constitutional or unconstitutional. We don't use a scale of 1 to 10. So it's a this or that, judicial review, the power of the Supreme Court that came from the court case Marbury versus Madison. Nominations to the Supreme Court happen, they begin with the president who nominates a Supreme Court justice, and then the Senate approves of that Supreme Court nomination. Approves or disapproves, whichever. This nomination serves for their entire life. Okay, so if you're nominated to the Supreme Court, you serve for your whole life. You don't run for election to the Supreme Court. The reason we do this is to remove politics from this process because we want Supreme Court justices to decide based on their personal beliefs, and those beliefs are backed up by the Constitution, not based on would the public support me if I make this decision or not, because they'd always be worried about being elected. So they're nominated for life. The House of Representatives. 2 pieces to go over here. Remember, to determine the number of representatives in the House, we have the census or the count. And remember this political cartoon over here. We have Uncle Sam telling the House it's about time to measure yourself again, because every 10 years we measure the population to determine how many representatives each state gets. The unique power of the House of Representatives includes choosing the president if there is a tie. It also includes the power of the purse. Remember, the House of Representatives is the lower house. That means that they're closer to the people, which means that they should have the best knowledge of where and what the people need, what funding they need. Those big decisions go to the House of Representatives. Separation of power. We separate the powers of the government between the three branches, which is the legislative or Congress, whichever you'd like to call it, the executive, or the judicial. So we have three branches of government, each with their own unique powers, each with the ability to check and balance the other two branches. And we do this because we want to avoid a tyrannical government, avoid tyranny, avoid one overruling person or a group of people in the government. And that is something that we learned from the control under the colonies that we did not like. So we set up three branches of government and separate the powers equally among them to run the country instead of having just one. Now, if you have any questions for your review, if you have any questions on the study guide, please let me know. I hope this helped. Good luck with your test tomorrow.